Hey, what's up guys? I'm Ben from Lion & Bear Woodworking, and my mission is to make woodworking fun, simple and easy for beginners. So today I'm going to be making a really easy router table in 1 hour, just using a router, insert plate, couple of legs, some pallet wood and some plywood. Let's go. So let me just show you the items that I've got here. This is the Triton JOF 001 router. I did a review on this router recently. It's a 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch because of the different collets I've got in it, which means it can mount really nicely to a router table. The feature on this that I really like is the micro adjustment, which means that you can make small adjustments to the height of the router bit. This can be controlled from the top, or from the underside should I say, so when it's mounted in a router table you can control it from there. So that's why I've chosen this router. These are actually from an old router table I got, a really cheap one, and I'm going to reuse these. However, for your point of view, you can buy these. These are just on spare parts on a lot of websites. I'll put a link to some in the description so you can find them. It's ready made. You can make some out of plywood or whatever if you want, but I'm trying to keep this really simple. Then I've got a Rockler insert plate. You'll need this just so that you can mount your router to it, and you can adjust. I can make the adjustments for the height adjustment on my router. This one's specially drilled out for my router. Depending what router you're using, you will need to make sure that you get an insert plate that suits your router. You could make your own by drilling into wood and creating it that way. However, these insert plates are really good and they don't cost the earth. First up, I needed to measure the legs to ascertain the width of the router tabletop. These legs measured in around 440 millimeters, which is roughly 17.5 inches. So I added on another 20 millimeters just to give me a slight overhang, which took it to about 460 millimeters or 18 inches. Then I measured the thickest part of the leg and the width of the insert plate so that I knew the minimum amount of space I'd need. I then decided to add another 110 millimeters or 4.25 inches to either side of the insert plate. So after doing some painful finger counting maths, I had my totals, which gave me a total tabletop length of 620 millimeters or about 24.5 inches. Once I figured out my measurements, I transferred them to a scrap of 18 millimeter plywood that I had lying around and then cut it to size on the table saw. So that's my piece of plywood cut. So that will sit on the legs, something like this. And then my plate, insert plate, will sit in the middle like this. So first job, let's get the top attached to the legs. So I flipped it over and measured again just to confirm the overhang at the front and the back. And then I marked this out using this handy dandy T-square, which just gave me a visual representation of where the legs would go. I then dropped the legs into place and marked where the holes needed to go. Because I'm going to be recessing the bolts and I'd marked the underside of my plywood, I drilled a skinny pilot hole through the centre of my marks, which then meant I could come back and drill a shallow hole with a Forstner bit. This allowed enough space for me to fit a socket in over the top of the M6 bolt I was going to use. Once I'd drilled the wider holes with the Forstner bit, I came back and drilled a wide enough hole for my bolts to drop all the way through like this. Next up, I needed to figure out where my insert plate needed to go. I measured the width of my board and the insert plate, and then I divided the leftover measurement by 2 and used this measurement to mark out where the top and the bottom of my insert plate would sit. I did exactly the same for the horizontal measurements, taking care to make sure that it was sitting square, and I now had a perfectly centered insert plate. Now all I needed to do was to make sure that I didn't move it while I drew around the plate. See? There I am, drawing around the plate. I also marked out the holes where the mounting screws would sit and then placed my router in the middle so I knew how much space it needed in the opening as a minimum. If you cut the hole too small, then this will cause issues. You'll also get issues if you cut out the entire rectangle of the insert plate, as it'll leave it with nothing to sit on. And if you don't leave enough space for the mounting screws, then it will leave it with no material to fix the plate to. So you'll want to make sure you allow for this as well. Once you've marked out your hole, you can cut it out, taking care to only cut the part that you want. I started by drilling 10 millimeter pilot holes in each corner and then cut it out with my jigsaw. This doesn't have to be overly neat as it'll all be covered by your insert plate anyway. Hey, get out of the way, Derek, this is my video. So now I've cut the hole out. I need to router in the space for my plate to fit in. That hole is for the router, this is for the plate. So in order to do that, what I've got to do is I've got my markings laid out already. So I need to put a template around that so that I can use my router to route out for my router. So in order to do this, I just made sure that the surface of the board and the MDF was fairly clean, and then I cut a strip of double-sided tape that I stuck near the line. It doesn't need to be exactly on the line, as the MDF will be running along the line anyway. Then I just take my chewed up fingernails and spend far too long trying to peel the back of the double-sided tape before giving up and just using the scissors. I really should stop biting my nails. I pressed it down nice and firmly and then just worked my way around the rectangle, doing exactly the same thing until my template was complete. So in order to set the depth for my router bit, I've got the same 18mm MDF that I've used for my template. I've got my insert plate itself, and then all I need to do is lay it on. Can't see it overly well, but I just adjust my depth, however you adjust your depth, until it's sitting flush with the surface, and that should give you the depth that you need. Now you're better off going a little bit too shallow and just tweaking it ever so slightly until you get it perfect, than going too deep. It's then just a case of chomping away at the material until the bearing on your bit hits your template. I worked my way in until all the material was removed. It's worth noting that when you do your template, you'll want to ensure that your pieces are wide enough to keep the base of the router stable, otherwise you might get a bit of wobble. Ultimately, it doesn't matter too much, as it only needs the majority of the routed section to sit perfectly for your insert plate to be stable. So don't stress too much if you give it the odd ding, as that's exactly what happened to me. Once you're happy with it, you can remove the template and double check the fit. If your fit isn't as you want it, then you'll need to retape your template and go again. I'm happy with mine though, so it's just a case of attaching the insert plate to the top. I used a couple of pocket hole screws for mine. All that's left is to attach the top, which is just a case of slotting the bolts through the top and lining them up with the holes on the legs. So the top is now on. However, I think it's a little bit wobbly still. These plastic legs have got no support further down, so there's some holes here that I'm just going to add a couple of support pieces on, maybe just the one at the back, so I can still access the router from the front. So let's cut a piece of wood. To do this, I'm just going to use a piece of pallet wood that I had lying around. I measured the distance between the holes and added a bit extra on. Then I marked it out and cut it on the miter saw. Then it was just a case of screwing it in place, and it's much more sturdy now. The final job is to attach the router. I took the base off it and then lined up the mounting holes with the holes in the insert plate. Then I just attached them using the bolts that came with the insert plate. Then I get the chance to try it out. It's nice and easy to insert the bit into the router from the top of the table. Then I can easily adjust it from the top using the adjustment tool that came with the router. That being said though, it's not exactly the most stable adjustment tool, as it doesn't slot in particularly deep, so it does need a bit of support to hold it in place. Easy enough though. Then I can turn it on and put a knife round over on the edge of a scrap of that MDF. Lovely stuff. And here it is, the finished router table. It's not amazing, but it was done really quick. Admittedly, probably a little bit longer than an hour, maybe an hour and a half, something like that. But it's got everything I need in it. What I'm going to do next at some point is probably make some storage for the spanner and the adjustment handle. Maybe somewhere to put my router bits as well within it. I'm also going to do a fence for it at some stage, but not something that you need immediately, because I tend to use bearing guided bits for doing edge profiling, that kind of thing. And if I do need a fence, I can just clamp something to the top. So not the end of the world. If you want to find out more about this particular router, I've got a review video right here. And if you're interested in finding out more about routers in general, then I've got a video right here you want to watch next.